Welcome back to the channel. This is OncaEngineering and I'm Herman Wakeman. And today's video is the part 3 in the Y pipe replacement series. But it's more than just that. And we'll talk about all the other aspects of the job. But today is going to be about reassembling, getting the car back together, and reaping the rewards. Let's get stuck in. Alright, welcome back. This video is a lot of material to cover. It is a half-hour video, so thanks for hanging in there for the whole thing. It's more than just about Y pipe replacement, which was, for this car, was a preventative measure. I didn't want to wait until the Y pipe broke. But then when I got into there were so many other concerns, like replacing plastic parts for metal parts. That was really one of the keys to this, this 3-part series or exercise. There's also a few engine modifications thrown in to deal with the water problem in the V of the engine. And also I addressed some rusty cam cover bolts due to the fact that there were sound insulation and foam pads up against those bolts. And there's what else? Hoses and belts are changed in this video. And the SuperCharger coupler is exchanged and the SuperCharger oil is added. So it's a lot to pack in, but I hope you find it valuable and you enjoy the ride. This job also took about 15 hours of labor time, spread over the course of about 3 weeks to accomplish, and about $650 in parts. Okay, I just wanted to point out that these are the intake plenums. I did put some of the brake caliper lube in the guide pin holes, and this rusting from the sound insulation does seem to be into the alloy, and that's because Ford chose to select the aluminum silicon copper with Fe, so there's some iron in there. All right. Now we have one more port to blank off, and that's over here. And this is the Symposer port. I did make up some blanks. I sent it over to Send Cut Send, 1/4 inch aluminum, and then we'll put that on there. Okay? And we'll seal that up with the black RTV. Now I couldn't find a torque spec on these bolts that go into the SuperCharger, but we do know that these bolts are 8mm, so they're an M8, and it looks like a 1.25 thread, and so we can look those up on a typical chart just to see how much torque they can nominally take. These are grade 8.8. That's another piece of information we can use, and it's a BUFO. Now it came to how much oil do I put back in the SuperCharger unit. I couldn't find a definitive number on the web, so I went to Skoll's website and they showed 42 different applications. Now I think I've identified the R1320, which is fitted to the V6 Jaguar engines, and the R1900, which is fitted to the V8 Jaguar engines. So I'm going to go with 125 milliliters of oil for the R1320, and I'm sticking with it. That still begs the question of where does all this SuperCharger oil go? I think it leaks out the seals into the intake under vacuum conditions, and possibly out the edges of the unit during compression conditions. Either way, these units do consume oil, and so I highly recommend refreshing it often. There's the Symposer pipe and a cork. The Symposer does have an electrical signal here, So when that is not present, when this has been removed, there is an error code that's stored in the memory of the body module. So I'm going to check this to see how much resistance there is, and maybe we can fool the computer into thinking there's an actuator out here. 22 ohms. Wow, that's roughly half an ampere or 5 watts. That's a lot of power draw just to make some sound go through. Huh. Well, 22 ohms is pretty low. I don't know if I want to stick this back in the car, but what I could do is maybe fool it with 100 ohms or 200 ohms, just enough to make it think there's a sensor or an actuator out there. That would get rid of the error code. This next modification is somewhat controversial. I think it's worthwhile. It helps to improve the engine design and to avoid accumulation of water in the V section of the engine. Let's see what you think. Here we are on the rear side of the engine. This cylinder is missing in the 6-cylinder variant of the AJ126 engine. The 133 has the 8th cylinder back here. There is a drain hole back there, you can see. And what I'd like to do is drill a hole from this chamber into that one. That's a slight modification to the engine, and it will then prevent the water buildup in the V section of the engine. So I'm thinking coming down here, oops, with a drill bit and trying to drill a hole from there into that chamber. Looks like it can be done. That's going to be a bit of a risk. I'd hate to go into the block, but it's going to benefit me so I don't keep accumulating so much water and having this corrosion. Okay, let's take a look at our drilled hole. This is the chamber which has a drain hole at the bottom, and this chamber here now has a hole that we can see because of the light. So that's working. This next mod is less of a modification and more of a treatment. Now, for rust on metal parts underneath the car, I do like to use the fluid film products. It's really good protection against corrosion. It does form a wax layer. It is a lanolin based or a wool wax product, and I think it's worthwhile applying it here to the V section of my engine, which is showing some rusting and corrosion. Now, the alloy that they're using is an aluminum silicon copper with iron. And that iron and the aluminum, that alloy is starting to corrode and rust. So I think it's worth a treatment. Let's go take a look and apply it to the V section of the engine. Basically, water that touches anything between this cam cover and this cam cover flows down into this space. That's a pretty wide section, and the engine cover, as some of you have taught me, doesn't do a good job of preventing water from creeping down into the V. So a modified engine cover is the real solution to keep water from the vents from entering the V section. In the meantime, we'll treat it with fluid film. The other thing I noticed was here on the crossover W pipe, the front crossover, call it what you want, but the new pipe has only about an 8mm thick flange, while the other one was 2.5 centimeters, so yeah, 23, 24 millimeters. So a long screw may have fit in here, but we're gonna have to go to a short screw. So again, that's a M6 1.0 by probably 20 millimeters would do the trick. SuperCharger belt. Water pump goes here, the idler pulley goes there, back here. Might have to take these three off. That would remove the SuperCharger tensioner and pulley, but give us access to do the water pump belt. There you have your three, and this one down here. The next step on the installation for me was to apply the knock sensor wire harness in the valley, and that comes attached to this bracket. Now I did take off all the old hard brittle plastic fasteners off of the knock sensor harness, and I just put some zip ties in to those holes that were normally used by these pieces. Now this harness has two knock sensors on it and a 2-pin connector. This 2-pin connector, I thought, went to the valve down here that opens up the cooling pipe that goes to the throttle body. That is a 2-pin connector. The same type, it does fit, but then you realize you can't attach this bracket. It's a stretch in the wires. Turns out the knock sensors and this particular element goes to the symposer. So I cut off the piece from the symposer, which is basically a delete. We can plug that, and later if I need to, I can always apply a 100 ohm or 200 ohm resistor to fool the sensor inside the brain box. Okay, so that was a trick. This goes to the symposer connector, not to the cooling pipe switch. Okay, we'll have to fasten this up, and then I think we're ready to make some connections here. Now this is part of the kit that's not well explained. The brass nipple is great. Pretty sure that goes in the end of this pipe here to replace this plastic one. The plastic one has a lot of burrs, very poor molds, a lot of flashing on there. I'm not satisfied with that, so we'll pop that off and stick this one here. Brass one does have a nice feature. There is a center cutout. And on the water pump here, I extracted a plastic gripper which goes into this brass fitting, and I do see a rubber washer. So this is an additional plastic fitting and additional rubber, I wouldn't call it a washer, what do you call it, a donut, a seal in the back. What I think happens if I stick the plastic onto the brass, these elements flare out, and that's supposed to grab inside there. So I'm pretty darn sure this element goes inside there, and this is a press fit and it snaps in with that detent. I'm sticking with that story. All right, let's go. There we go, one brass fitting. Now I have this one on there. That was took a bit of oil lubrication to pop that over the rubber bushing. Now, Offering up the water pump now, because that has to go right in there. Get that started. Working on your, yeah, these two go in. Let's do it. Okay, trying to, let's do it. Wires that way? Okay, got it. Okay, you're gonna be down your side. I'll let that go away. Okay, man, just take this bar again. Push it, go, go. Alright, I'm gonna stop it there. Get this again. Okay, and this me. Now we're going back in. I think that might be yours. Nice, look at that, no wonder. Yeah. No wonder. You see that? You turn it, it's a water, you turn it. Hot there. Hot dogs. Okay, the supercharger is now finger tight. We haven't torqued it yet. The torque wrench is here, set to 27 Newton meters or 20 foot-pounds, and we'll do that later. But first I'm taking a look at the W pipe, or the front crossover pipe. It does attach to the Y pipe here, but if we look at it, this hole is barely aligned. It is somewhat oblong, so they tried to take into account some adjustment. And then this hole here doesn't align at all. So we're going to have to drill that out. So I'll mark it, and then I'll get my Dremel tool and make the holes to fit. Some assembly required. Okay, to make some room for the bolts to get in, I'm going to use this tungsten carbide cutter. It's a nice Dremel tool. It's really made for hard metals. I don't know how it's going to work in this soft aluminum. It might just gum up the bit, but I'm just going to try to make some room for the bolts in these two holes here. Alright, let's get to it. Oh yeah, safety goggles are our best. Ready to go, This will come on. From the coolant, we have this pipe here, which has to be applied. It grabs onto two things. This is what I forgot about. One pipe goes to the W, and the other one goes to the throttle body. the throttle body pipe. Okay, so I forgot to put that in. Back up a step, do it again. All right, tech tip for the day. These cooling connections should be first, but what I did is did the throttle body first, rotate these parts out of the way, and then we can reapply the intake manifold, which has to sneak right by this fitting. And once this is in, fold these back over and make this one last. So it's a bit of a dance between making these two coolant line connections with installing the intake plenum. All right, we're getting close to the final stages. I've removed the alignment or dowel pins from the holes so that we could set the charge air cooler right down with proper alignment. And that held the gasket in place as well. So these pins are really useful. They also help me to land the SuperCharger onto the intake manifold runners. So make yourself a set of dowel or alignment pins, and it will pay off. Now all the screws have been hand inserted with special attention given to the two long bolts in the front. What I have not yet placed are the small screws which secure the fuel line to the front of the SuperCharger. That will be one of the later steps. So I've also placed all the other pipes and hoses in their proximate locations because it helps you to guide which one gets put on first. Otherwise, you'll have to be taking them on and off because you'll forget that one lies underneath the other. So I've been just laying all the pipes out in approximate locations just so I don't forget any when dressing the engine. All right, now I'm going to start with just doing a mild torque and placing the screws, first the center four, and then working in a crosshatch pattern around the edges. I'm not doing final torque, just doing basically fastening them down with the help of a power tool. Okay, so drop these 10 millimeters in. Now a bunch of T40s in a crosshatch pattern. After torquing the charge air cooler to the SuperCharger, I found that the next best thing was to route the high pressure fuel line which crosses the two cylinder banks. This does take the 17 millimeters crowfoot on this side and a 17 millimeter wrench on the other side to fasten it, but then we're ready to also locate it with our Torx T30 screws. Here we are on the left hand side of the engine and securing the 17 millimeter fuel hose connector, or I should say the high pressure fuel line. Tighten to snug right there. That felt good. And then we'll fasten the rest of this stuff later. I'm just going to take a quick walk around the engine, make sure everything is fine. Out back here we took out the imposer. All the lines got dressed up. I was able to reconnect the wire harness that goes to the bottom of the crossover pipe because there is a valve there. I missed that previously. All these connections are good. We're going to look for air leaks on this one. This is wire harness. There's a clip there that made it good. Positive crankcase ventilation on the left here is good. These hoses fine, clipped in. That metal clip I was able to push back in. There is a plastic tab missing, no problem there. Okay, this solenoid's been reactivated, installed. We'll look for cooling leaks here and look for a high pressure fuel leak on the 17 millimeter nut. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Okay, what else? The intake went back in, that was good. This positive crankcase ventilation connector is unfortunately a slight interference fit with the hose. I'll probably live with that, or maybe I can try. What is it? This guy is, it's got a screw back here. Maybe I'll have to move that, give that a little more clearance, because that's touching. That's no bueno. Okay, these lines were attached. This goes down to the bottom of the throttle body, the cooling hose that comes out there. This is the cooling hose over the top, and these two lines go back to the reservoir tank. Yep, those are good. We're gonna look for cooling leaks here. Obviously down in here, down where the Y pipe is hanging out, we'll have to keep an eye on that. Oil system was not touched. The belts were touched. If they make squeals, we're gonna have to address that. Okay, coming over here, positive crankcase is well attached. All the connectors are attached. Okay, look for cooling leaks here. And this is the other high pressure fuel. We'll keep an eye on that, make sure that doesn't leak. This is floating a little bit. I have nothing to tie it to. Maybe I should zip tie it to something. This goes over to the reservoir tank. Oh, by the way, this reservoir screw, there was a brass one that came with the kit from Euro AMP, but it doesn't fit this thread size, so this plastic one went right back on. Okay, this is positive, I'm sorry. This is the oil catch can system. On the right-hand side, PCV, positive crankcase ventilation. I tied into that hose, and on my car it comes over here to an oil catch can. Now this oil catch can catches all sorts of sin, fuel vapor, oil vapor, moisture, a bunch of garbage, and so I have to clean it out. If you watch video number 4 or 5 in my series, that goes over the installation and what the oil catch can does for the car. And it looks like it's working because the intake valves are really clean, I think. So this is catching a lot of crap. Okay, back here we're in pretty good shape. I did have to tie these two lines together to avoid abrasion. Otherwise, I think everything is done. All right, let's fill it up with cooling fluid and try giving it a start. Okay, this is embarrassing. I have to charge my car from the front port because I closed the back trunk or boot lid and I can't get in because I disconnected the battery. So I hope this works. Another low battery, huh? All right, here we go. Start engine. That sounds pretty good. No belt squeal. I'm going to turn it off and look for oil, gas and coolant leaks. Use the old nose sensor. No fuel down there. That's good. No burnt rubber smell, that's good. No coolant. No fuel out of here. Good. All right. I might run it for a little while. I filled it up with coolant, but we have to wait for the engine to suck it down. I only put in 1 gallon, so it's at half coolant capacity right now. It needs 1 more gallon to go. Coming off the exhaust pipe.
on? Alright. The SuperCharger coupler does sound a little stiff. So the coupler is about here. I'm not sure if that's making noise. No leaks.
So let's take an assessment of the parts left over. First, there's a bunch of leftover hardware because the new parts came with their hardware, or I went to the hardware store to buy some new bolts. Either way, they're no longer needed. They go into my extra bin. Then there's all these plastic clips that were brittle and where I had to cut to remove wires. So those were replaced with zip ties. There's a few extra hose clamps left over because all the new parts that I installed came with hose clamps. And there's a few bits and bobs left over from the Euro AMP kit. These are things I just simply didn't use. I'll hang on to them. Then there's the Symposer. That thing's a goner. And then there's all the sound insulation bits and bobs. Those are a goner. And I also removed the side covers from my engine. I think I'll hang on to them just in case. Finally, I made some extra blanking plates for the Symposer delete. Drop me a line if you're interested. I'll send you one. And of course I have some tools left over, the dowel pins used for the SuperCharger. And finally, there's this piece. And I've got no idea where it came from or where it goes. When I figure it out, I'll put it back on the car. Overall, I'll give myself a 9 out of 10. Alright, that concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I would say overall, this job gets a score of about 7 out of 10. Was it very easy? No. But was it difficult? No. It was sort of that middle zone. A lot of small nuts and bolt work. Nothing too difficult or fantastical about it, but it did take some time and patience. I would also give the part quality from the Euro AMP kit a score of about 8 out of 10. It could have been better in some places. I did have to rework the crossover pipe in the front, or the W pipe, such that I could fit it to the mounting locations found on the SuperCharger. So that was a little bit of a pain. But otherwise, overall, I'm fairly pleased. And don't forget, there are other options, like going to the dealer to get their version of the Y pipe and the front crossover or W pipe, which you may find to be a better fit or finish. Now for this job, I did take off the hood and the under tray underneath, and that gave me great access to the front of the engine, which made this job so much easier. I don't think you could do it without taking off the under tray. You could probably do it without removing the hood, but I found it so much easier to do so. Now I am excited about the Symposer delete, but I'm also wondering if removing the foam from either side of the engine will expose me to some more engine noise, like the ticking of the fuel injectors or some of the other valve train noise. We'll see. But in the meantime, I have found that the SuperCharger coupler, the solid coupler, does introduce some more SuperCharger noise into the engine bay. And so I'll see how that goes. Others have suggested looking into an Eaton SuperCharger coupler replacement, and that also might be worthwhile. Hey, so I hope you've enjoyed this three-part series. I certainly enjoyed it, and I can't wait to get back into my car and run it, and maybe do a cross-country road trip. I'm thinking about going to Colorado, and I might fly, or I might just drive out and back. We'll see. Either way, all the best and good luck with your jobs, and remember, my friends, drive well.